Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's time to look at another McFarlane Toys Batman action figure, and today I'm going to be looking at the DC Multiverse Dark Knight line, which goes from strength to strength and keeps expanding. This time I'll be taking a look at the Skydive, inverted commas, Hong Kong, unmasked Bruce Wayne Dark Knight, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's start off by taking a look at the packaging. No real surprises here. This is the standard DC Multiverse line, so there's not an awful lot going on here. A lot of black borders. There's open window display here with the blue and white collage behind made up of different comic book images, and then of course we can see the action figure up front and centre there with his various accessories. At the bottom of the packaging we do have the Dark Knight logo, which is pretty cool, but by now you probably already know my feelings on this branding. I'm not a huge fan of it. It tends to be a little bit bland, a little bit boring, which we'll see if we look at the side panel. We just have this blank void and just the text of what this figure actually is. This feels like such a wasted opportunity, more so here than anywhere else, because this would have been great to actually have a still from the film, an illustrated image of the character, anything to just brighten this up and make it look a bit more attractive if you decide to put this on your shelf on its side profile. If we look at the back of the packaging though, things do improve. We actually have this great image here. This is an illustrated image of the Dark Knight, which, it looks pretty nice. It's pretty cool. I think that works well. And it's a shame that we didn't get this on the side panel as well. This is largely text-free, so it's pretty displayable, and, will look good if you put it in a glass cabinet. So the first thing I should acknowledge is that this figure is pretty much a straight re-release of the original Dark Knight figure from the DC Multiverse line. A great figure, one sadly I was not able to track down, so I was very keen to get hold of this version. The only real difference here is that he doesn't come with a cape, of course, and he's got an alternate head. And whilst we're talking about that head, let's take a look at this head sculpt. Of course, it is meant to be Christian Bale, unmasked, and it's not a terrible likeness, especially considering the scale that we're dealing with here, but it's also not particularly sharp. And I think where it falls down is actually on the broadness of the face, because obviously Christian Bale has quite aquiline features, and this face just looks a little bit too broad, really, to be accurate. Otherwise, there are some little details there, particularly around the lips and the eyes, which I do think are pretty much spot on. So it's a shame it doesn't quite work, but it's not bad either. It's just somewhere in between, I think. There are some nice paint apps running through this figure though. We can actually see a bit of a wash running through his hair, so there's a little bit of depth and texture in there, which is great, and they have made an effort to actually give him a bit of sort of 5 o'clock shadow on his face. It's gone a little bit wrong, or at least it has on mine, because you'll notice that sort of stripe effect, it actually kind of gone up his face, so it just kind of looks like he's just got dirt splashed up his face there. I don't know if you can see that very clearly here, but yeah, it hasn't been particularly successful in this instance. In terms of the body sculpt, I can't really fault this. I think they've done a tremendous job. Now, if you already own the Dark Knight figure, you know what to expect, and I'm guessing you're probably pretty pleased with it. I sadly don't, but this looks great to me. I really like the way this looks. There's actually a few different plastics being used to actually create that sense of depth and texture, which is brilliant, and I think it works really well. Particularly the gold on the belt is very vibrant and bright, which is fantastic, and there's a lot of little details, individual joints and grooves and things like that in the armour that have been plucked out here and writ large, which is fantastic. If I was going to be critical, it would be nice if there was more of a wash running over this to enhance it a little bit, but I actually don't think it looks too bad in this context. It looks pretty screen accurate, so I think we've got enough here to make it feel authentic, and I don't really feel like it needs an awful lot more. I did want to point out he comes with just 2 gripping hands. That's important because he doesn't get any alternate hands, as we'll see a little bit later. So there's no closed fist, there's no open palm hands. This is all you're getting with this particular version of this release. I don't have much else to comment on, other than to say that he stands freely and comfortably on his own. He doesn't really require a stand, which is fantastic for posing and makes him feel a little bit more stable. There's not as much detail on the boots and legs, but there's still a little bit, and you can see a different mix of plastics, some darker and lighter, which gives it that sense of texture, which is great. So let's take a look at the articulation. He has a ball joint at the top of the neck, so the head will spin all the way around, and it will lean left and right a really healthy distance. It will also nod up and down a pretty decent distance too. There is a butterfly wing joint at the top of the shoulder there, which is good. It's not a huge range of motion, but it is enough to just give it a little bit extra reach. Of course, that arm will lift up and out despite the padding, which is great. There's a complementary bicep swivel, double joint in the elbow, allowing that lower arm to go all the way back to his head there, which is fantastic. Then we have that slightly frustrating ball joint that McFarlane Toys insist on using for the wrist. So the hand will hinge forwards and backwards, and it will rotate all the way around, but it's just not particularly reliable. It's a little bit clunky for my liking. Now he's got 2 points of articulation in the torso. There's a ball joint in the upper chest and also in the lower abdomen, the waist as well, allowing him to spin from side to side, lean left and right a really good distance. I mean, this is pretty impressive, and that of course also extends to him being able to bend forwards and backwards. More backwards, in truth, he can go back a really good distance, not as much forward, but nevertheless there's a good range of motion here. Ball joints in the hips, of course, the legs will kick out to the side, they'll go forwards and they'll go backwards a little bit. There's a double joint at the knee, allowing that lower leg to kick all the way back, and then we have that strange swivel come ball joint that McFarlane Toys use for the ankle, where the foot will twist from side to side like a swivel, but it'll also hinge forwards and backwards as well. And then there is some toe articulation. So, looking at the accessories, he comes with his backpack, his gun thingy, and his sticky timer. And I'm wondering whether this has set some kind of record. Surely this has got to be the first Batman figure ever released that doesn't come with a Batarang. Quite unusual, but I think it probably works for this particular release. Now the backpack is pretty cool. It's quite a glossy paint, which is great, so again it adds a little bit more depth. It just contrasts nicely against the other plastics that are used on the figure, and it stands out, and I think it's quite a cool design. There's not much else to say. Obviously it just slides in through a peg on his back, but his launcher is less successful. Now those of you with eagle eyes will probably have noticed that he's holding this incorrectly. This is not how he holds it actually in the film. I've done that deliberately because I think this is how it looks best, and that really comes down to the material they've used to make this particular launcher or the gun, whatever you want to call it. Although it looks nice, like the scale looks correct and some decent paint apps, the material they've used is a very light rubber, so it's very rubbery, which means that when you put it in his grip the way he should hold it in those first two grippers, it just looks really wrong, as we can see here. It just folds and it just doesn't look right. Now this is how he should be holding it, but yeah, I'm not hugely impressed with the way this looks overall. So for me, I would rather have him holding it like this, because that just looks a little bit better. It makes the gun look a little bit more stable and robust. That's a bit of a misfire, I've got to be honest. And as for the sticky timer, I think this is a nice little piece. It's a lovely little detail. You can actually see the numbers on there. It's so finely painted and it looks really quite cool. It just feels a little bit redundant because I'm not entirely sure what you can do with this really. So it's not really something you can hold, and it's kind of a really small world building piece if you're going to put this in a display anywhere. I'm not quite sure how you'd utilize it in truth. Okay, so before I wrap up for today, you may have realised I recently reviewed the Catwoman and Batpod, and I thought it would be really fun to put my Batman on the Batpod. Realising, of course, that this isn't the appropriate version of Batman, but the body is still the same, so I think the effects will be the same regardless of what version you use here. And yeah, it doesn't really work. It doesn't look comfortable, let's put it that way. Certainly this version of Batman cannot really look up. His head just will not bend enough up to really make this work. He's always going to be looking down, which is unfortunate. Also, really struggled to get his feet to meet the base plates or get his knees into the knee holders. It just does not quite work. He can grip onto the handles, but it's a bit of a struggle, and I had some challenges here, particularly with those gauntlets, as they would jam up against the rest of the plastic there. This made it quite tricky to get him into a decent position. So this isn't something I'm going to be utilising. That's a real shame, because I was hoping that would be a side benefit of getting the Batpod, being able to swap out the characters who could use it, but really it's best suited for the Catwoman, I think. Okay, so my final thoughts on this figure. I'm going to give this a 3-star rating, and it's a very uncomfortable 3 stars because I really like the base figure. I think the figure itself would be absolutely pretty fantastic if this was the Dark Knight figure, for example, because that is basically the same body, the same articulation scheme, and it's pretty phenomenal. I think it's actually really good, and it makes me really sad that I missed that first time around, because I think it's a really nice figure. They've done a really good job of it. Bear in mind, what's really selling this figure is the alternate unmasked head sculpt and some of these accessories, and I don't feel like any of those elements actually really work for this particular release. The head sculpt is fine, it's passable, it's not great. The paint apps are a little bit sloppy on the face there. Obviously, when we talk about those accessories, this gun is really weak, literally weak, because it's made of rubber and it just does not hold its shape, which means you can't really hold it accurately. And as for the sticky timer, well, I'm not really sure what you're supposed to do with that. And Otherwise, this just feels a little bit redundant and unnecessary. I suppose this release really is for people who missed the first version of The Dark Knight first time around, like myself. I'm glad to have it now, but I would much rather have that version. Or if you're a massive fan and you like having the unmasked versions of Batman, then you're probably going to want to pick this up so you can complete your set. For me, I'm not that worried about that element, so this feels like it would be an unnecessary double dip unless you particularly wanted the Christian Bale head sculpt. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do consider giving the video a like. That kind of thing really does help the channel out and it allows me to keep making more content. And if you're interested in seeing more content, remember to hit subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos coming soon.